ServPro.com. ServPro, independently owned and operated. Whether it's water, mold, or fire damage, they'll help you restore your home or business. ServPro is available 24/7. ServPro, helping to make it like it never even happened. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or BaptistJax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Good morning. I'm Dan Scanlon, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, when history doesn't matter, we ask a local historian why he says it's time to say farewell to the big red Mathews Bridge. And as part of our ongoing election coverage, we sit down with incumbent District 12 Representative Wyman Duggan as he seeks a fourth term in office. Plus, news for Jags sportscaster Alessandra Pontbriand joins us to break down the Jags' impressive performance in Week 1 of the NFL preseason. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also tag us on Facebook, Instagram, or X. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The Israeli military has issued new evacuation orders for Palestinians in southern Gaza this week. The orders come after a deadly weekend that saw more than 90 Palestinians killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school. That's where thousands of Palestinians were sheltering. As NPR's Hadil Al-Shalchi reports, it's also a time when ceasefire talks hang in the balance.
Palestinians living in Khan Yunis and the surrounding areas were told to move elsewhere yesterday as the Israeli military pushes into many destroyed towns and cities where they've previously battled militants. The evacuation orders were dropped as leaflets from the sky. A large portion of the 2.3 million Palestinians living in Gaza have been displaced numerous times, with many saying that nowhere remains safe. A new round of ceasefire talks are expected to take place on Thursday, but Hamas hinted that it may not take part in a statement yesterday, calling on the mediators to implement the deal already on the table instead of, quote, going to more rounds of negotiations or new proposals. Hadil Al-Shalchi, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
The Pentagon says Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is ordering additional U.S. forces to the Middle East amid Iran's threat to attack Israel. They would join the U.S. Navy ships already sent to the region earlier this month. NPR's Dave Mistich says Austin spoke with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant by phone yesterday.
Austin's order calls for a guided missile submarine, the USS Georgia, to make its way to the Middle East. The Pentagon chief also ordered the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group to move more quickly to the area. The Lincoln is equipped with F-35 fighter jets. A Pentagon spokesman says Austin and Gallant also discussed the importance of mitigating civilian harm, as well as progress towards securing a ceasefire and the release of hostages held in Gaza.
NPR's Dave Mistich reporting. A trial begins today in Ocala, Florida, for a woman who shot and killed her neighbor last year through her own locked and bolted front door. From Central Florida Public Media, Joe Burns reports Susan Lawrence claimed self-defense but faces a manslaughter charge.
Susan Lawrence shot Adjika Owens, a 35-year-old black mother of 4, when Owens came to the door of her apartment and banged on it. Lawrence had been involved in an altercation with Owens' children. Lawrence, who is white, had been feuding with the family over the kids playing near her apartment. Witnesses said she would use racial slurs against them. Their grandmother, Pamela Diaz, says a conviction would bring closure and healing.
I'm always amazed at their strength, but this ordeal, this tragedy, this loss has really changed them. They're not the carefree, happy children that they once were.
2 of Owen's children witnessed the shooting. For NPR News, I'm Joe Burns in Ocala, Florida.
Forecasters are tracking a tropical disturbance in the Atlantic. A watch is now up for Puerto Rico. You're listening to NPR.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Michelle Coram. The Jacksonville Housing Authority is set to approve a new CEO this hour during a Board of Commissioners meeting. Our news partner News4Jax reports the board appears to favor Rosalind Phillips as interim CEO. Phillips previously worked for the city of Jacksonville in various leadership roles and for the Housing Authority as a commissioner and chair of the board. She would replace acting CEO Vanessa Dunn, who resigned recently. Courses at Florida's 12 public universities and colleges will be flagged for review if they use the words Israel, Israeli, Palestine, Palestinian, Middle East, Zionism, Judaism, or Jews in coursework descriptions. The Florida Board of Governors will require faculties to submit instructional syllabi on this, and Lynn Miller is an FGCU journalism professor with concerns.
How will anti-Semitism or anti-Israeli bias be defined or assessed? So, as we've seen, bias can be sometimes obvious. It can also be tricky. So often opposing sides reading a factual article claim bias when the facts don't agree with their beliefs.
A spokesperson with the Council for American Islamic Relations in Florida believes the board's review could affect academic freedom as well as First Amendment rights. It's almost 80 degrees, a 50% chance of thunderstorms today, and a heat advisory in effect.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Capital One, offering their travel card, Venture. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Details at CapitalOne.com. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at rwjf.org.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Hey, good morning. I'm Dan Scanlon in for Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, it's a vital artery between downtown and Arlington, and it helped transform Jacksonville's mid-century suburban landscape. But one local historian says it's time to start planning to replace the Mathews Bridge. Later in the program, we ask incumbent District 12 Representative Wyman Duggan about why he's asking voters to give him a fourth term in office. But first, it's functionally deficient, demonstrably obsolete, and named after a vocal segregationist. Is it time to say hasta la vista to the Mathews Bridge? Well, to discuss that, we're joined by Alan Bliss, Chief Executive Officer of the Jacksonville History Center, and a very good morning to you, Alan.
Good morning to you, Dan.
You know, this is a topic that I'm very comfortable with, having done 40 years of journalism in the city. I actually covered the 60th anniversary and talked to people who had been part of the grand opening celebration and ridden across it in fire trucks, etc., and well aware that we don't have some of the things that resulted from it anymore. The Grand Hotel in Arlington is gone. The Regency Square Mall is going to get redeveloped. But let's talk about why you think, and recently wrote an article for the Jacksonville Historical Society newsletter called Jacksonville History Matters, and the title of your story was When History Doesn't Matter. What are you getting at?
Yeah, so the Mathews Bridge is historic. It's historic on the face of it because of its age. You know, there is a volunteer organization that has a website called historicbridges.org. And this organization of knowledgeable, engaged volunteers, many of them professionals, actually rates bridges all over the United States based on a number of criteria that make them historic. And they have a pretty well-defined matrix of qualifying factors, and they rate bridges as to their historicity on a scale of 1 to 10. And this organization rates the Mathews Bridge as a 9 on that level. And if you'd like, later on, we can talk a little bit about what those criteria are. But it wasn't the first time that I had heard that said about the Mathews Bridge. You know, it has always sort of been a consideration of mine when I drive the Mathews Bridge, having seen what kind of incidents can bring traffic to a halt, having experienced, you know, the feeling of slowing down. Somebody may be driving hazardously in front of me, not having any alternative lanes to bail out into in case there is a serious accident or incident. So I don't think it takes a great deal of imagination on the part of any motorist to consider that this is, you know, not a safe modern bridge as we conceive those to be in the 21st century.
Well, you know,
this became Go ahead.
Many may remember that the top of that bridge used to be steel grating, and that caused many incidents. And there was one crazy night I was up there covering a fatal accident, and I parked on it. I stood on that grating and realized that if I dropped my keys, I'd never see them again to the car. So I literally put the keys on the driver's seat to cover the case, and then made sure to safely navigate back to the car. Scary to be there at night and see the waters below. But as you were about to say, there's reasons for the deficiency that bridge has in the modern day.
Yeah, and you make a good point. If you have to step out of your car on that bridge for any reason, it's a dangerous place to be, plain and simple. Modern bridges that have shoulders, breakdown lanes, and even in some cases go so far as to have bike and pedestrian paths adjacent to them. If you have to get out of your car and evacuate an accident scene on such a bridge, you've got a refuge, a place to go, right? On the Mathews Bridge, no. You're safe on the Mathews Bridge only if you are inside a moving vehicle that's headed for the other end of the bridge and keeps moving. Otherwise, it's a risky situation. As I say, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to envision that.
But yet it was the grandest bridge in its day, 70 plus years ago, correct?
At its time, yes. I mean, it was a great leap forward in transportation alternatives for Jacksonville. You know, the Arlington community had been isolated from downtown Jacksonville and the rest of the neighborhoods to the west. There used to be a ferry that operated across that section of the river, but it was only the construction of the Mathews Bridge that really allowed Arlington to connect and start to really grow significantly. And it was seen as sort of an announcement of Jacksonville's increasing structural and community unification. It was the product, Dan, really, of the assumptions of the bridge designers and traffic engineers of its time. And those assumptions really all rose out of automobiles. The assumption was that anything that allowed people to go more places by car was a good thing. And the advocacy for this went back to the 1930s. You mentioned the namesake of the bridge, former Florida State Senator John Mathews. He had been advocating for this bridge since back in the late 1930s. Not a lot of infrastructure projects made much progress during the early 1940s owing to World War II. But as soon as the war was over, then there was an increased appetite for investment in transportation infrastructure. That happened all over the United States. And the John Mathews Bridge was a great example of that here in Jacksonville.
Literally, see the USA in your Chevrolet. I mean, literally, when that opened, you get the shopping center, Town and Country. You get the Grand Hotel that they just destroyed with the convention center next to it. And then in 1967, I believe, the first chunk of Regency Square Mall opens, allowing people from the West Side and downtown to go to a shopping mall, which was a brand new idea at the time.
Yeah, some people blame Regency Square for the demise of downtown's retail shopping. The fact is that it had already been going on for some time. By the 1950s, though, shopping centers in the suburbs were kind of the nail in the coffin of downtown shopping. But what you also got, Dan, in the early 1950s was this tremendous surge of new construction of homes and commercial buildings, churches, all following the mid-century modern architectural style that was really emergent after the end of World War II. There had been a lack of new innovative design and construction in buildings during the 1930s owing to the Depression, again, a suppression of new development because of World War II. There was an appetite for something that was new and modern that sort of evoked the new jet age right after the end of the war. And Arlington was a blank slate. Architects, developers, investors, homeowners, business people all saw this as an opportunity to really make their mark in a place that was emerging. So the fact that the Mathews Bridge connected that neighborhood to the rest of Jacksonville beginning in 1953 helps account for that surge of mid-century modern architecture that today characterizes that neighborhood throughout. It's one of the things that is unifying Arlington's residents and its business community now in the 2020s. Arlington is a neighborhood that has been really reconnecting with its identity as a place that grew out of the mid-century modern period. And in doing that, I think that they see themselves as really beginning to come into their own, and I agree. I think that's true. But the irony is, as I think about that, when I drive back and forth across the Mathews Bridge and think about what's going on in Arlington with its new Renaissance, highlighting its architecture and its cultural background and strengthening its identity, the Mathews Bridge isn't contributing anything to that, Dan. In fact, it's impeding it.
Well, if you're just joining us, we are talking with historian Alan Bliss about why he thinks it's time to start phasing out the Mathews Bridge. Do you commute on that bridge? Have you ever been stuck on that bridge? Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. So, Alan, give us some history of that bridge. I drove it probably last Thursday, and I remember few things about it. Obviously, there is the large monument on the Arlington side to when it was built. And then my impression is very low sides, very high center bridge to clear river traffic. And I still have nightmares about that bridge grading that they replaced with concrete. The big concern was that it was going to be too heavy versus the grading. So give us some bridge history. And again, its design now in the 21st century versus 1930s, 40s, 50s on an architect's table.
Yeah, so the structure type of the bridge is a metal cantilever. It's put together with steel riveted together. It's called a through truss bridge, and its approach decks are metal deck girders, and they're fixed and paved with concrete. The contractor was Bethlehem Steel Company of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They are a noted, nationally famous bridge builder. The local designer was a Jacksonville firm, Reynolds, Smith & Hills, based here in Jacksonville. The bridge is 49 feet wide. That's the total roadway width. And its total length is 7,376 feet. It's about 1.4 miles long. It underwent a major renovation, a rehabilitation, we should say, in 2007. And yeah, you're right. The main span length is the most notable part of it, the high span. That's about 810 feet. The 49 feet of width really is just enough for 4 traffic lanes, and no median lane, no breakdown lane. There's really, as I said, there's no place to go. But that struck people in 1953 as being pretty unremarkable. The traffic count was much lower. Speeds tended to be lower. It's hard for me to picture what it must have felt like to motorists back in the 1950s driving across it. But Dan, a few minutes ago, you mentioned the disturbing behavior of vehicles when they cross that steel grate at the center span. Man, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who remember that and indeed agree that they found it extremely disturbing and unnerving. Especially when it was wet. It was though tires lost their traction on that steel grating. Cars would kind of swerve and skid slightly. People's hearts were in their mouths as they were crossing it. Now, indeed, that steel grating has been replaced with a concrete slab in that area, paved over the steel. So that seems to have abated some of those concerns. But I still hear from people who intentionally avoid crossing that bridge. And I have to tell you, my office, as you know, is not far from WJCT studios. We're right next to the ViStar Veterans Memorial Arena. I live out in Jacksonville Beach, and so I have 5 different routes to choose from when I'm coming into town. The Arlington Expressway and the Mathews Bridge are one of them. But if I have a choice, I avoid going that way, just because I think the Mathews Bridge is suboptimal. It's substandard. I frankly think it's unsafe.
We're getting some phone calls from people who drive the bridge, so let's go to Lee on the north side who drives that bridge every day. Lee?
Hi.
You're on the air. Go for it.
Okay. I understand some of the dangers of the bridge and everything, but more people get in car accidents and all at intersections being T-boned. I drive that bridge every day to go see my family. My sister lives in Arlington. And I do deliveries. So I go from downtown to Arlington like 50 times a day for doing deliveries. And if I can't go over the Mathews, then I have to go over the Hart Bridge and then come up the back way through University Home. So that is a very important bridge to me and some of my family because we literally travel it 3-4 times a day.
All right, thank you. That brings up the next person giving us a yell. Stanley from the north side is wondering what should go where the bridge is. So, Stanley, you're on the air.
Yes, I don't want to take up much time. Sir, good information, by the way. My question to you, what do you think should be done about the bridge? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, we remember, some of us, when that bridge was hit and was out of service after a Navy supply ship hit it, and it took quite a while to fix it. So, Alan, anybody thinking about a replacement for this bridge, and how long might it take to replace this bridge?
So every time there is a new mayoral administration that takes office, I show up for the mayor's transition committee meetings. In the 2015 case, it was the Economic Development Committee, Transition Committee. In the most recent new administration coming in, I volunteered for the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. And one of the people who came to speak to us was a representative of the Florida Department of Transportation. And it's the FDOT, Florida Department of Transportation, that actually owns the Mathews Bridge and has responsibility for it because it's on a state road. And I asked about the concerns about the bridge's age and about its performance capabilities and its structural integrity. And this gentleman from DOT sat in the table in the transition committee with his hands folded comfortably like a peaceful Buddha in front of us. And he heard me out. And he gave me a slight smug smile, like he'd heard from guys like me before for years. And he just shook his head peacefully and he said, that bridge will never be replaced. And I said, why? And he said, because it's historic. That's why we take care of it. But he said, our only obligation is to maintain it. We have no responsibility to make any plans for replacement.
You know,
I get it. And the DOT is limited in what it can do because of its categorization of the bridge. So what my thinking is now is that our city officials, our legislative delegation, if necessary, our congressional delegation, need to pull together and form a intergovernmental task force to start exploring the ways that we can replace that bridge. The earlier caller said that it's a very important transportation artery for her and her family. I get that. It is for everybody. It shouldn't be eliminated. It should be modernized. It should actually be replaced. Now, that's going to be extraordinarily difficult. Where do you find the land on either side of the river to connect the new bridge to? And what would the cost of that likely be? Those are questions beyond the scope of a humble historian like me, although I spent a lot of time thinking about transportation infrastructure. But those are questions for the people who really are the pros in that field. Will it take a long time and be fabulously expensive? Yes. Is it necessary and worth doing? Absolutely. You know, I've talked a little bit about Arlington's renaissance on the east side of the river. On the west side of the river, in the downtown core, we have another neighborhood, the historic East Side community, that's also realizing its long-held dream of a neighborhood renaissance. And it seems as though that we are giving short shrift to both of those communities by allowing them to be connected by a bridge that really seems to be functionally obsolete, that you would never build again today if you had to. And finally, let me point out, we're getting ready to invest $1 billion in a new stadium of the future that lies almost right at the west end of the Arlington Expressway. It's one of the major routes that people travel to get back and forth to and from games and other special events in the sports and entertainment district. It seems to me as though the bridge is the weak link.
The scary thing is, though, that as we had, I'm sure, Saturday night with the preseason game with the Jaguars, a lot of traffic coming into that stadium and leaving on the Mathews Bridge. The only option one would think would be to expand by adding extra spans on either side, and that's been done in other bridges in the city, going back to the Intercoastal Waterway down to the Jacksonville beach. They put another second span there, et cetera, allowing the center span to remain as it was. We have a lot of comments on social media. Mike, on Facebook, the Mathews Bridge named for a segregationist. Mayor Duggan should appoint a task force to look at all names, markers, monuments that glorify racism, and would the Historical Society create that list? We've touched upon the fact that the Mathews Bridge is named after a segregationist. But what do you think, Alan? Is there a reason to change the name?
I think it's time to replace the bridge. And I do not think that it would be appropriate to name a bridge in the future after that senator. He's noted mainly for his role in advocating for the bridge, and so I get it as to why the bridge bears his name now. It's not particularly celebrating his politics or his ideology or his attitude toward racism. So rather than focus on renaming an existing bridge, and I have no idea where we'd go looking for another name for it, I think the appropriate play here is just to replace the bridge altogether and move on.
Bruce from Callahan, in the case your guest is going to advocate for a big concrete bridge to replace the Mathews. Production of concrete is going to put a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. What about lowering the speed limit and putting up some signs that say safe following distance instead? Any comment, Alan?
I don't know about that. Lowering speed limits and telling people how to be better drivers has never worked particularly effectively in my experience.
Okay, now, as I was talking about, as we've talked about, back in 2013, a Navy ship hit that bridge. 109,000 vehicles a day at that time were using that bridge. They'd have to go someplace else. The authorities were afraid at the time, because I wrote part of the story on that the bridge with the damage to it could not handle traffic until people were brought in to look at it. And I can't remember how long it was out of service, but I certainly remember seeing the broken pieces that hit. We've got an interesting call here. It's Jerry at the Beaches. Jerry, you're on the air.
Hey, Dan, Jerry Holland. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, sir. That's our supervisor of elections, in case you don't know the name. Go for it.
Well, I was calling because there's kind of a legend or urban legend that when they dedicated the bridge, which I think was in 1954, is that Johnny Weissmuller was there and dove off the bridge. Is there any truth to that?
I did not do that when I did the 60th anniversary story. I didn't hear that. What about you, Alan? Is that historical fact or fallacy?
Mr. Supervisor, I think we're going to have to do a little research on that. If that's true, I had not heard it before, but it is a great story. I'd like to know the facts about that.
And where? What height did he do this from, if this indeed occurred? If you're there between the island and Arlington, I guess that wouldn't be too high a height. If you're at the top of the span, that would be a quite splashalicious impact. So, well, again, there's other. Here we are, this Navy vessel being moved from one side of the bridge to the other, hits the span. But the bridge itself, Alan, is deficient in many ways when it comes to the boating around it. The channel itself, the bases of the bridge. What are some of the issues there?
The issues there, Dan, are that the federal channel, that's the channel that is dredged and maintained by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, passes underneath the bridge. Now, it's true that the channel at that location is not as deep as it is at the lower sections of the river, down around the main street, down around the Napoleon Bonaparte Broward Bridge. But ocean-going ships approach in the St. Johns River as close as the docks, really just a few hundred yards to the north of the bridge. The site that's used by Southeastern Toyota distributors to offload their ocean-going vessels carrying new vehicles from Japan is very close to the bridge. Tugboats and towboats pushing large ocean-going barges approach even closer than that to the bridge. Crowley Maritime has operated a major ocean-going barge facility close to that. Barges that are being transited up the river pass beneath the bridge on their way to destinations further upriver, such as Green Cove Springs. The fender system around the piers for the bridge may have appeared to be adequate at the time that it was built, and perhaps even when it was rehabilitated in 2007. But really, they're no more consequential than the set of timber pilings that you see around intercoastal waterway bridges, maybe a little bit more robust, but nothing like the fendering system that would be appropriate for a bridge that's engineered to withstand a strike from any kind of an ocean-going vessel. That's one of the points of vulnerability of the bridge. And ships that are transiting the river on their way to and from the repair facilities, such as North Florida shipyards, they also pass beneath the bridge, and it presents a navigational hazard to the pilots of those vessels. And the proof of that is, as you just mentioned, Dan, in 2013. It was a military sealift command vessel, I believe, that inadvertently struck the bridge and damaged it. And yeah, it was out of service for traffic for over a month until it was restored and tested and found to be okay to be returned to service.
Well,
The
it's just
DOT
about departure.
contracted-
It's just about departure time. Let's get one more question in. Lewis from Ortega. Lewis, what's your question?
Hey, good morning. I tuned in maybe just a bit late. I may have missed something, but I'm just trying to understand, what is this fascination that we have in Jacksonville with tearing everything down? Everything old needs to be torn down when we don't even necessarily have plans for what we'll do with the land when we tear it down or the space. And then I'm like, and this is just kind of a sidebar. In the main theme, the Mathews Bridge, could it not be converted to all those lanes going in one direction, and then you put another bridge on top, like I've seen in Manhattan, and then the lanes are going in the opposite direction on the new? Also, like when you look at how we keep tearing everything down, we're forgetting about our history, and look at the code of these new buildings going up that are all wood frame, like Main Street and the other one, the apartments that caught on fire. When we tear down everything new, are we not losing sight of what happened in the past and have the codes enforcement? Like,
Lewis, we've got to wrap up, but thank you. Let me see if Alan, can you answer that? Alan, obviously Historical Society, very much interested in preserving. Can we preserve it? Again, I'll ask the question.
Yeah, the caller makes a lot of good points, and there was a lot in that question. You know, it may seem a little contradictory that an organization such as mine that advocates for historic preservation is, in this case, advocating to eliminate something that really is historic. But it's just proof that preservation needs to be smart and sustainable.
All right.
We advocate for preserving buildings that have historic value, but they have to be sustainable in the 21st century. And this bridge is an example of something that is not.
Thank you. Alan Bliss, head of the Jacksonville Historical Society. Thank you very much. For State House District 12 will not be decided until November. Joining me is the incumbent Republican State Representative Wyman Duggan. Thank you for being here, Wyman.
Good morning, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
We met last week. I can't remember what city event. There's been a lot of things that the mayor's been doing of late, and certainly many of our state lawmakers have shown up. It's a nice chance to chat after the ribbon's cut or after the golden shovel gets used. So It was nice to see you. Now, you're running for re-election this November for District 12. So first of all, even though I've been around for 40 years, there's been some rejiggering of things. District 12 is where?
It's South Central Duval County on both sides of the river. So on the east side, it starts at the foot of the Main Street Bridge, goes all the way to Julington Creek, generally west of the railroad track and Old St. Augustine Road and Hood Landing Road as it goes down into Julington Creek. And then on the west side of the river, it starts at the Ortega River and heads south to the Clay County line and follows Timuquana / 103rd for the most part, all the way out to Old Middleburg Road down to the county line. So on both sides of the river, kind of squat down on the county line.
But very suburban. I mean, you're talking community after community, home after home, subdivision, very much non-industrial, except for your major roads that have your retail, right?
And NAS Jacksonville.
Well, let's not forget that. That is 1940, good golly, 1942 or 43. And here's your little known fact, the original logo done by Walt Disney.
Very nice.
Very cool to realize that. It's, and you know, home of a lot of things. Now, what about you? I've seen you. I don't cover state politics, but as a reporter for 40 years, I've certainly seen you at places. So who are you?
I'm Wyman Duggan.
Nice to meet you. But
born here in Jacksonville, born right here in Baptist Hospital. Both my parents worked in what was then the Gulf Life Tower as stockbrokers. But unfortunately, divorced when I was pretty young. Dad stayed here. Mom moved to Tallahassee. So I did all my, primary schooling over there. But moved back here right after law school in 1995 and been back ever since.
Oh, so you're an attorney?
Yes. I'm with Rogers Towers.
Probably have seen you or talked to you in years past about certain things they've done too, not as a lawmaker. Now, why did you decide that it was time to put your hat in the ring all those years ago to go to Tallahassee and represent your district?
So I have done quite a bit of appointed public service over that time span. Always very felt a compulsion to pay my civic rent, as somebody else once described
Interesting
it.
way to say it.
Not original with me, but really I think captures the essence of the obligation. but always knew that at some point I wanted to attempt elected public service. So in 2017, the predecessor, the previous incumbent for the district, what was then District 15 prior to redistricting, announced that after 2 terms he was going to run for Attorney General. And so it was going to be an open seat. And so I declared in 17, I was elected in 18, reelected in 20. Then we redistricted, reelected without opposition in 22. Nobody else ran. And so now I'm running for my last term. In the House, you can do 4 2-year terms.
And there's no term limits for a state lawmaker?
Yes.
Per se? There is?
4 2-year terms.
4 2. So this is it for you.
Well, correct.
And you want
fingers crossed.
And you want to wrap it up on a high note, I guess. You want to maybe see some things done. So what might be some of the priorities for the next 2 years, if indeed you do that 3-hour drive every week?
Right. So nobody has served all 8 years for this seat in quite a long time. For various reasons, people have left along the way. For example, Jennifer Carroll left to become lieutenant governor.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like the lineage of this seat in this district, and the lines move, but generally, this seat has not had somebody represented it for all 8 years in quite a long time. What that means is you don't get seniority within the legislative body to help deliver for your community, your district, in the way that you can if you're there for your last term and you're part of the leadership of the House. So what I have been blessed to be able to do, and this was a commitment that I made when I ran, I was going to stay the whole time. I wasn't ever going to leave to run for something else or if I was fortunate enough to keep getting reelected. And so it's think of it as like high school or college in the sense of you have freshman, sophomore, junior terms of 2 years. And then as in any organization that's hierarchical, the senior people have more influence and more responsibility and more ability to prioritize policy and funding resources to issues and areas that are important to them. And so the incoming Speaker of the House, starting in November, actually on Election Day, our terms begin and end on Election Day, unlike many offices, is from Miami, but has a small leadership team, and I'm blessed to be on that team, and I'm going to use that position and that opportunity to help the district and Northeast Florida in every way that I can.
So there's no new kid on the block syndrome here. You and those in that leadership team have already been through the trenches over the past few years. So therefore, you're comfortable. All of you should be comfortable going in for the next 2 years.
That's exactly right.
Now, challenger Ben Sandlin was on the show on 8/7, criticized your performance on environmental issues. Your thoughts about that? We had our own environmental issues here. We had dehumidifiers running. I did not hear that in the newsroom, unfortunately. But what about the environmental issue question that he has?
Right. I watched and listened to that. He said I voted against Sierra Club proposals, which is not accurate. But more to the point, we as a legislature in the 6 years that I have been there, and with Governor DeSantis's support and leadership, have spent record amounts of funding on environmental issues and conservation issues, probably at least $4 billion protecting just the Everglades, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into land conservation, land stewardship, allowing, for example, working family farms to be compensated for their future development rights so that they can just keep being a farm, but not have to sell it for development. Protecting the Indian River Lagoon from the red tide problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I would put the record of the Republican legislature. I mean, it's led by Republicans. We control the agenda in terms of funding, and I would put our record against anybody in the country in terms of prioritizing protecting our environment and conservation issues.
So let's talk about the specific needs that you might envision for your district, including, like you said, Mandarin, Ortega, very densely residential. What might be the needs that you'd have to deal with? Because we have a caller from Mandarin who might be able to add or subtract to that afterwards.
Sure.
But what do you see the needs?
Well, absolutely, septic tank conversion, septic to sewer conversion, particularly along, for example, Julington Creek, our water bodies. There are a lot, even in Ortega Forest, a well-heeled neighborhood, I would call it. Most of that's on septic. A lot of that's on septic.
Which is a scary thought when you consider how close they are to the Ortega River,
Correct.
Arlington Creek, St. John's River, and other little creeks. Yeah.
Right, exactly right. And so we have that, obviously, we have that issue in the urban core of Jacksonville from, promises of consolidation that were never fulfilled. But lots of other areas of town that were developed on septic tanks. And particularly if they are if the developments are 20, 30, 40 years old and those systems have never been replaced, cleaned, pumped out, but never replaced. Just, over time, they're going to degrade in terms of their efficiency.
Yeah, some years ago, Tecito Creek in Mandarin was a major septic tank leakage issue. We've got Susan from Mandarin, and she has a question about a regret you may or may not have. Susan, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if the representative regrets his vote on the vouchers. At the time it was being debated in the House, Angie Nixon put up an amendment to say at least limit it so that millionaires can't get the voucher, and the Florida Policy Institute projected that it would cost taxpayers $4 billion, and a recent article said that it is indeed costing taxpayers $4 billion. So I wonder if he regrets his yes vote on that bill. Thanks.
Thanks.
I recognize Susan. This is a hobby horse issue for her. I don't regret it at all. We fund students. We fund children. We don't fund institutions. And we as a state have made the policy preference that we are going to let parents, we're going to give them educational choice. It's not just school choice. We're going to let parents make those decisions about how they want to educate their children. They may want to homeschool them. My kids went through traditional public school, magnet public schools. So we have lots of options for parents, and we want to make sure that that's the parents who get to decide how they want their child educated.
Well, here's a grandparent who regrets forgetting that there's 2 charter schools on the way to this place and got caught in the traffic on the first day of school there. So
Right. I left early this morning too.
So, Nancy emails, can you explain the entity Citizens for Building Florida's Future, which has received over $500,000 in donations from Republican interests and the party? Are you the sole partner in this entity? This entity has donated only to extreme candidates for school board aligned with Moms for Liberty.
Sure, that's my PC. Most elected officials have a campaign account, which is the hard money, and then a political committee, which is the soft money recipient. So that is my PC.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the eye of the beholder. Extremist school board candidates. Again, these are 4 school board candidates who are wanting to empower parents. So let the voters decide. We'll see. I think those who are regarded as extremists are going to actually do pretty well.
Okay. Another question comes up here regarding some of the money that you have in your campaign donations comes from insurance companies. Does that impact your ability to tackle an insurance issue if it comes up?
Not at all. No, if you can't take their money and look them in the eye and tell them no, then you shouldn't be in this game.
And I've run some election campaigns way back in the dark ages. That's always been an intriguing question to me. How do you say no to the man or woman who represents someone who gave you money?
Easily. If it's not the right policy, you just say, look, I understand your point of view. I mean, people forget that political contributions, as the Supreme Court has ruled, is a form of speech. Everybody has the right to support their candidate, to support their issue, give money to causes or candidates that they want to support. But at the end of the day, if you are that elected official, then you need to make sure that you understand why are you doing this job. And, for those of us who are doing it to look out for the interests of their community and their district and their region and their state, you have to be guided by those principles of what is best overall for the state, not what is best for that one person who's here talking to you about some issue that they care about.
Okay. Not ascribing that you have any other political ambitions in 2 years. Saying no to a potential donor to your next campaign, is that something you have to take into consideration, or you just go through?
I don't. I mean, I'm speaking for myself.
Okay. You sponsored a bill that abolished citizen review boards in at least 20 cities. I presume that would be police citizen review boards. Do you believe state lawmakers should be able to override what local governments want?
So that's an incorrect statement.
Okay, again,
I know, and my opponent also incorrectly characterized it. It did not abolish the civilian review boards. They will still be able, any current or future civilian review board or police accountability board, whatever you want to call them, will be able to continue to do things that they are doing now. They can talk about policies, procedures, standards, training, culture, systemic abuses, patterns and practices of racism in the past. What they cannot do going forward is investigate instances, allegations of misconduct of specific officers. That's all the bill does. It prohibits any of those organizations from receiving, processing, or investigating complaints of misconduct by individual officers.
And JSO, along with other agencies, does not tend to believe in citizen review boards, and in fact has quoted the sheriff himself that there are certain laws that really prohibit them. So that may be a moot point. Yes, no?
I'm not sure what the sheriff has said in that regard. I did note a poll that was on Florida poll results that were on Florida Politics recently with respect to Duval County that said 68% of the residents think JSO is doing a great job. And by a 65% to 30% margin, they do not fear being a victim of police brutality. So I don't think there's, a case to be made for a civilian review board here in Duval County.
With 90 seconds left, I said I was going to ask you this. Just your thoughts on the state of the presidential Democratic versus Republican race as it now winds down.
Well, I think it's unprecedented. You would agree in terms of things that have transpired on both sides. I mean, on the Democratic side, we have now a presumptive nominee who never received a single vote in any primary in 2020 or 2024 from any Democrat, and so now that's the person who has been parachuted in. I mean, President Biden pretty much acknowledged in an interview over the weekend that he was forced out of the race. So we've never seen really anything like that before. Even in 1968, Lyndon Johnson announced in March. Well, then that was well before the primary season started. So there was a full and fair primary on the Democratic side back then. So we've never seen anything like that. Of course, on the Republican side, we've got a former president coming back, survives an assassination attempt. So it's unprecedented. We're kind of in uncharted waters.
I would think we'll all be watching that debate with a bowl of popcorn in our hands.
Let's hope there's more than one.
Well, you see. All right. So any other thoughts as you enter this race, as you go now toward the fall to run for your fourth and final state representative term?
It's just that it's such an honor and privilege to represent the district, the citizens of District 12 and the citizens of Jacksonville. I could not be more proud of our region and to be a part of helping represent it.
And it's been a very interesting year or two up in Tallahassee. So what are your legislative priorities for the next 2 years? What do you want to jump on and get going?
Well, so again, I've been able to help bring state resources to a lot of our great nonprofits and cultural institutions and institutions of higher learning. I'm going to continue to do that. I think Jacksonville is actually this is a bit of an issue for hobby horse issue for me. Commercial space. I think Jacksonville is extremely well positioned to capitalize on commercial space. I'm thinking of like SpaceX, those types of operation between the Cecil Field, which used to be in my district and which I still have a warm spot in my heart for, and then some the old St. Johns River Power Park site. Those two could be tremendous assets and resources that we could use to capitalize on getting a piece of the commercial space.
And we do
industry.
have a satellite company in Jacksonville, and we do have obviously the spaceport berth out there. So we do have that little bit there to worry about. Wyman Duggan, I want to thank you for a wonderful time talking with you. Now we've actually interviewed.
That's right.
I've interviewed you, so that's good. So thank you for being here, and stick around. We'll be back in just a minute with a closer look at Week 1 of the Jaguars preseason.
Thanks, Dan.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, answering who, what, when, where, why, and how is critical to proving the truth. More at terrellhogan.com.
Many local races will be decided in the August 20th primaries. Before you vote, compare the candidates at jaxtoday.org/vote. That's voter guides you can trust at jaxtoday.org/vote.
On the next Fresh Air, our guest Joe Moore, a former Army sniper turned FBI informant, takes us into the inner workings of the Ku Klux Klan in his new memoir, White Robes and Broken Badges. He shares how he infiltrated the KKK, foiled a plot to assassinate Barack Obama, and warns about the current movement, which he says is growing. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
It's been a month since the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. The Secret Service is finally publicly accepting responsibility.
The sole responsibility of our agency is to make sure our protectees are never put in danger. And I'm working to make sure that this failure does not happen again.
But what led to that failure? Understanding the long-term troubles inside the Secret Service. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The influence of Christian nationalism is growing within our laws and now the presidential race. For the next installment in our series, If You Can Keep It, which looks at the stakes of the race, we're examining the role of the religious right. Christian nationalists believe the U.S. is a Christian nation and its laws should be guided by those values. How is the movement playing out in the presidential race? Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we are back. Well, the Jaguars preseason kicked off Saturday night at Everbank Stadium, and they emerged triumphant against last season's Super Bowl champs, the Kansas City Chiefs. Joined now by Alessandra Pontbriand, sports anchor reporter for News for Jax, our news partner. And Alessandra, I tell you, I was way out of town this weekend, but I heard the news. And as a lifelong Jaguars fan, even though I come from New York, it brought a smile to my face to see that we kicked in that well, that Trevor Lawrence did well, that the hopes and prayers of the new coach or the newer coach seemed to be bearing some fruit. Take it away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm from New York too, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah, this was a good performance for the Jaguars. You know, last season didn't end the way anyone wanted it to end, team nor fans. But I will say they brought in a lot of new defensive players, a new defensive coordinator, defensive assistant coaches, and the defense played, in my opinion, really well. The starters didn't play for much for both teams. That's typical for a preseason game, no more than a quarter for them. But Trevor Lawrence, he threw a touchdown pass to Travis Etienne for 9 yards. That was the first scoring drive after Parker Washington's 73-yard kickoff return, which we'll talk about the kickoffs in a few moments. But, yeah, they looked really good. The defense looked great. I will say that one more time. I really like the defense in this game, but this is only a preseason game. I don't know if they would actually have come out victorious in the regular season against the Chiefs. That's just such a good team that has set the standard for the NFL for the past couple of years. But in the preseason, this was a good performance for the Jaguars, a good first performance for the team as they head into this week against the Bucs.
You know, I will tell you this, over the past few years with the new coach, there have been sparks of brilliance. And I tell you, we were pretty darn excited last year there for a while. So the proof was in the pudding. They apparently, the formulas are working. Whatever's being done, whoever's being brought in, apparently is starting to gel. I know we're looking at second and third string folks being players on a first preseason game, but did you see some gelling happening that could foretell season goodness?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're looking at the preseason games, what you really want to look at is the depth of your team. So yes, we saw the starters, they did well, but you want to see who the second string, the third string, maybe even the fourth string players, how well they are. And that's who you really can evaluate during these preseason games. And with not only the score being 26-13 Jaguars against Chiefs, you also saw that the depth for the Jaguars was good. It was improved, in my opinion, from last year, which is really good because during the regular season, if someone goes down, an injury, they have to sit out for a play, you know that you have a second string guy, possibly a third string guy that should be able to fill in. Maybe he won't, give you a highlight play, but he will at least be able to keep it the way it is.
But correct me if I'm wrong, we had some of that last year.
Oh, yeah,
we
a lot of it.
lost our first string, and we were down to second and third string, and suddenly magic was happening.
Yeah, absolutely. When CJ Beathard played against the Panthers, it's the Panthers. That's not a good team at all. So I'm not too surprised that they beat them. But I think this year, when you're looking, we're specifically talking about the quarterbacks right now. When you're looking at who's going to be the backup quarterback in the preseason game, it was CJ Beathard. But Mac Jones, who was a starting NFL quarterback, a first-round draft pick, he may be able to do a better job if it comes to Trevor Lawrence having to sit out. Hopefully that won't happen. So let's knock on wood, everyone. But I don't think people should read too much into who was the second string quarterback in this preseason game. I think maybe, come this Saturday, I doubt any of the starters will play just because they'll have a ton of work against the Bucs in the two joint practices on Wednesday and Thursday. But I wouldn't read too much into it. Don't read too much into the depth chart either, which I think Mac Jones is actually second on the unofficial depth chart right now. So
full stadium, I would presume. And what was their mood?
Listen, those Kansas City Chiefs fans, they are loud, they're proud, and they travel for their team. There's a lot of red in the stands. Jaguars fans, though, did really well. I think, obviously, when you come out with a win, no matter if it's preseason or the regular season, you're going to be happy. All in all, I do think the Jaguars look much better. They look improved, but you're cautiously optimistic just because this is the preseason, of course.
I know it's tough, one game only, but give me some guess for the preseason. I know we've had some preseasons where we've pretty much won them all, and by golly, and then thud, they drop in season. So what are your thoughts? Will we continue this?
Well, I hope so. I think this week you're looking at joint practices on Wednesday and Thursday at the Miller Electric Center against the Bucs. So if you can get tickets to that would actually be really cool for fans to watch. We'll, of course, be out there, the News for Jack sports team. I think, next week they go against the Falcons at the Falcons. I think they can come out undefeated, but again, the preseason really doesn't mean too much. It means nothing for the regular season and for the Super Bowl. So you just have to be cautiously optimistic and just hope that they can improve and no one gets hurt.
It's just nice. It's just nice. Well, thank you, Alessandra. Thank you so much for being here. And that's our program. We encourage your feedback and suggestions.